Berin ma'am, we have reached the time. We can begin now.
Okay, thank you, Neeraj. Good evening and good morning, dear participants. This is Berin Lukas, Head, Department of Sociology and Industrial Relations, St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru. On behalf of our principal, Reverend Father Dr. Victor Lobo, staff and students, I extend to each one of you a very warm welcome for this webinar, Crisis Confronting a Changed World, a Humanitarian Response. It is also my privilege to extend a warm welcome to our speakers, Ashik Kabir of Bangladesh, from Bangladesh, Hamidullah Afghan from Afghanistan, and Muslim Shah from Maryland, USA. We have 522 registered participants. I thank all of you for this overwhelming response. I'm sure each one of us will have new insights and new learning from this webinar. Welcome once again and thank you.
Good evening and good morning, participants and dear students from different parts of the globe. I am Maria from the Department of Sociology, St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Bengaluru. It's my privilege to introduce three amazing speakers, Mr. Kabir Ashik from Bangladesh, Mr. Hamidullah Afghan from Afghanistan, and Mr. Muslim Shah from Maryland, USA, for this evening international webinar for Crisis Confronting a Changed World, a Humanitarian Response. Coming to our first speaker, Kabir Ashik graduated from St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru in the year 2014 with EPS, BA EPS. After his graduation from St. Joseph's College, he proceeded to Jawaharlal Nehru University to do his master's in economics. During his students' days at St. Joseph's College, Ashik was one of the very active member of Social Zest Association, and he was a documentary head of Social Zest Association in the year 2014. Ashik also contributed 58 documentaries for the Department of Sociology on various social issues. Coming to his scholarship, ICCR scholarship provided by the Government of India from 2011 to 2014, under the scholarship opportunity was affiliated with Youth Student Forum of India, International Students Federation of Bangalore University, and International Student Association, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He also carried out a desk research in coordination with GFMD support unit based in Geneva to prepare a background note publication and IOM's internal document. And Ashik also contributed to external situation reports of the including activities of different humanitarian agencies in 2017. Currently, Ashik is working as a senior program support assistant, transition and recovery division, International Organizations for Migration, United Nations Migration Agency, Bangladesh. Over to Ashik.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Maria ma'am, for the introduction. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants for joining. I would like to thank Berin ma'am, Maria ma'am, and Anuplal sir for organizing this nice presentation. It is an honor for me to come back to Bangalore, connecting to Bangalore and St. Joseph's. After 7 years, I completed my BA in 2014 from St. Joseph's. And after that, after 7 years, I'm very happy to connecting with the audiences, teachers, and the organizers. Thank you very much. I would like to start with my presentation right now. Please give me a moment to connect my presentation. So as already explained by Maria ma'am, that I am currently working with United Nations Bangladesh. So I have been working for last 5 years with International Organization for Migration, which is the United Nations Migrant Agency. You all know that Bangladesh from 2017 is the home for the almost 1 million Rohingya refugees. I have been lucky to work with Bangladesh United Nations IOM from 2017, from the beginning of the crisis. So as I begin my presentation on the crisis confronting a changed world, humanitarian response, first of all, I would like to explain how UN works. So as all of us knows that UN started in 1945, soon after the World War II was ended. The main purpose of United Nations was to continue the peace and support the poor countries in development. But when the United Nations is working, they have a 6 main body. With the 6 main body, they are always doing the operations and General Assembly is a yearly or annually assembly of 193 member countries of United Nations, where they come together in September, New York, and discuss the ongoing issues, the challenges, the successes, and everything. Then there is a Security Council. All of you know that there are 5 permanent members in Security Council. The main purpose of Security Council is to maintain the peace and control the conflicts all over the world. And the 5 permanent members are China, Russia, UK, USA, and 5 permanent countries. And then there are 10 temporary permanent countries, which is switch every 5 years. There are more than 100,000 peacekeeping army, which is supported by the Security Council, and they're sent to different conflict zones to control the severity of the war or conflict. And then there is a very important body which is called Economic and Social Council. This Economic and Social Council, they are the main body to give the funding of the to the countries where development funds are needed, where economic supports are needed, where people are suffering, where the country is not being able to support the people with livelihood. This Economic and Social Council are making sure that there is fund going to these countries, and then the poverty is reduced to a certain amount of percentage. Then there is Trusteeship Council. Trusteeship Council, it already stopped working in 1994. The main work of this Trusteeship Council was to help the countries who wanted freedom or who wanted independence. After 1994, after giving freedom to more than 70 countries, they stopped working, but still is an active council in UN. And then we have International Court of Justice, where any diplomatical problem, any conflicts, any conflict issues, they are taken into this court, and this court bilaterally or multilaterally decides the fate of the country. And then there is the Secretariat. The Secretariat is headed by the Secretary General. You know, the Secretary General oversees all the administrative works of UN through the Secretariat. So while we are talking about the UN agency, we all know about the Sustainable Development Goals. These Sustainable Development Goals were replaced by the Millennium Development Goals in 2015. There are 17 sustainable goals which are targeted by the 193 countries of the UN membership. All these 17 countries are all the 17 SDGs are interrelated. There are, like, suppose at the number 17, there are partnership for goals. Like, it is focus of partnership because it is not possible for a particular country or organization to support their activity individually. So with the partnerships, a public sector can come forward, government can come forward, private sector can come forward. They can share their knowledge, they can share their expertise, they can connect it together and then try to achieve the goals. For an example, you all know about WFP, the World Food Program, who is a UN food agency. They are supporting the poor countries by giving food or producing food at that country, making the process easier. So their main target is to reduce the hunger to zero, which is #2 goal, which is called zero hunger. So with the partnership of the private sector, WFP is producing dairy products, they are producing food, they are producing different farm items and supporting the countries in need. It is very elaborate to discuss about the SDGs. It is a long discussion. I know you need to read about the SDGs. You can go through any UN website and read about them. But all this, like the SDG of no poverty, is connected with good health. It is connected with good quality education. It is connected with gender equality. It is connected with clean water and sanitation. So all are interconnected. And in 2030, all these achievements, there's a certain target is set out. In 2030, there will be evaluation by all the countries, and they will evaluate how much they have achieved of this goal, and a new strategy or new goal will be selected in the year 2030. So coming to the discussion, the humanitarian response, as I already mentioned that I'm working in Bangladesh, all of us are well familiar with the Rohingya crisis that is going on currently in the world. This is considered as the most largest crisis the world they are providing to this Rohingya community. I would like to discuss about the history of Rohingya. All of us know something about Rohingya crisis. We have different opinion. Different countries have different opinion. Well, I am in Bangladesh. I have different opinion. When you are in India or any other country, you have a different opinion because there are different sources, different perspectives. But since I have worked with the Rohingya crisis from the beginning of 2016, I have the like first-person idea. I have witnessed the crisis. I have seen the crisis. I have done some research, and I have a knowledge that I can share with you. It goes back to the 15th century. From the 15th century, Myanmar has shown that these Rohingya people are continuously crossing the border, coming to the Bangladesh side. Since Bangladesh and Myanmar has 7 kilometers open border, there's a small river in between. Anyone can cross the border anytime. 15th centuries, these Rohingyas, they started moving from the Rakhine state, which was previously known as the Arakan state. They were frequently moving towards Bangladesh, India, China, mostly in Bangladesh because the dialect they use, their dialect is similar to Bangladeshi language, which is called Bengali, or we call it Chittagonian tongue. So because of that similarity, they feel comfortable to come back to Bangladesh, and they migrated through last 500, 600 years. In the history, it is always like very brutal with the Rohingya Muslim people because they have been suppressed from 16th century till now continuously with different rulers, Burmese rulers, be it Burmese kings, be it the British rulers, be it the Japanese rulers. When Japan was taking control of Myanmar in 1942, this Rohingya people was continuously suppressed. After Myanmar got independent in 1948 from British, Myanmar government also didn't recognize this ethnic Muslim community. Rohingya population is known as the most persuaded like ethnic community in the world. if you go and see any history, you can see that in 1982, when the Myanmar government released the citizenship law, they have recognized 135 communities, ethnic communities living in Myanmar, but they didn't recognize Rohingya. From then, these Rohingya people are suffering so much that they don't have the right of movement, they don't have right of education, they don't have right to marry, they don't have right to food. Different organization, humanitarian organization like the UN, always trying to get to Rakhine State to support them, but there is a very restricted support given to these people. Imagine for 30-40 years, these Rohingya people have been receiving only humanitarian support. They cannot earn anything, they cannot do a job, they cannot go to school, they have no uh, support in that area, they have no recognition. So there were incidents in 2012, they ran to Bangladesh, that time in a small amount. In 2016, when the military crackdown happened, 80,000 Rohingya people came to Bangladesh, and in 2017 August, it was much more worse. It was more than 1 million people crossed the border and came to Bangladesh for survival. There was a military crackdown in 25th August 2017. This 1 million people immediately came to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh government, you already know, Bangladesh is a developing country, but Bangladesh is burdened with their own challenges. Still, Bangladesh is considered the highly densely populated country in the world, and they have to adjust 1 million people more, and they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the logistics to support these people. So they requested the United Nations agencies, the humanitarian agencies, NGOs, international NGOs to come forward and help these people. And then this humanitarian support or response started in Bangladesh in 2017. It took 1 year, 1 year of work, more than 180 organizations working in Bangladesh to support this humanitarian crisis, to support this Rohingya people, and it took almost 2 years to make everything systematic. Right now, everything is systematic, but they are fully dependent on the support of humanitarian agencies. They in Bangladesh, they are considered as refugees, and they are also restricted in the camp area only. I have had the chance to do some research on Rohingya history. Here in the presentation, you can see 2 links. These are my write-ups on history of Rohingya. If you want to have a good idea about the Rohingya crisis, you can go through my these publications. If you cannot click the links, you can always search my name, Ashik Kabir, and Rohingya crisis. You can find this link and you can read and you can know more about it. So with this, I am moving that how the UN or the humanitarian organizations are supporting this Rohingya crisis. First of all, I already mentioned that there are about 1 million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. 1 million. You cannot imagine like how difficult it is to be in the camp, and the camp area are too congested. Like in 2017, I saw by myself that there were more than 7,000 acres of land totally were deforested, because this is a forest area, mountain area, where when these Rohingya people came to Bangladesh, they started living into the forest area. And when 1 million people are coming to this forest area, you know, they started cutting the trees, settle down, and then started using the trees as their fuel for cooking and everything. So in a month or two, everything like 7,000 acre of land were vanished. Right now we're trying to like do the plantation and achieve the previously this deforested lands. And there are 34 camps in a city called Cox's Bazar. Cox's Bazar is the most northwestern city of Bangladesh. Cox's Bazar is the 126-kilometer long sea beach area, which has a border with Myanmar. So when these 34 camps are together, it is very congested. I will show in my last slide that the camps are next to next. It is very difficult to people in adjust in very small space. And these people are continuously being supported by specialized agencies of United Nations. You know that United Nations itself is a broad idea. United Nations has different agencies who has a specialization or expertise on different sectors, we call. Like World Food Program is supporting the food program. My agency, like IOM, which is UN Migration, we are supporting with lot of sectors like health, then livelihood, environment, energy, a lot of scope of working. And then there are special organizations like UN Women who are supporting the Rohingya women in empowerment, in uplifting them. When we do this humanitarian support in Bangladesh, we have to be very neutral. When we are working with the United Nations, even though I'm from Bangladesh, but I have to be very neutral while supporting these beneficiaries, poor people. So we have to continuously coordinate with the Bangladesh government. Whatever activities we're doing, each camp has a focal, each camp has a government officer who is looking after the management of the camp. And we have to regularly coordinate with the Bangladesh government, take the government permission to implement any projects, any activity. Then one of the most important part of the UN agency is capacity building of the local NGOs or international NGOs. So the donors are giving the money to UN. So UN is routing this money to local NGOs, monitor the activity of the local NGO, by bringing the experts, specialists, continuously monitor the activity of the local NGOs, support them, monitor them, help them to implement, to maintain the accountability. And then we have donor support. You already know, like the developed countries, they are the main donors in UN. Bangladesh has also these donors like UK, USA, European Union, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Canada. These rich countries are funding UN, and through this funding, Bangladesh is receiving money, and different agencies are receiving money, and they are implementing the activities that the donor wants to see the improvement in the projects or activity. Then I'm coming to the support to the local host community. You see that suddenly 1 million people are coming to an area where only 200,000 host community people were living. And with the emergence and influx of this 1 million Rohingya people, it is very difficult to share your land, share your food with like five times more number of the people. So when we are supporting this Rohingya population, after 1 year we realized that we have poor people in the host community in Bangladesh only. So the because of the influx, the host community were highly impacted in livelihood, in health, and losing the lands and everything. So after 2 years, we started supporting this host community who are surrounded by these camp areas. So as I have already mentioned, we have specialized departments to support this humanitarian crisis. When a humanitarian crisis happen, UN declares emergency. UN has two type of operation: normal operation or development operation, and emergency operation. Emergency operations are country like Bangladesh, Yemen, then Somalia, Ghana, where different kind of conflicts are going on. So when the emergencies are happening, there are some particular departments that always supports the interventions. We from our agency, United Nations Migration, we are supporting health. We have expert doctors in different camp location. We are also supporting the government capacity, because government doesn't have much more capacity to look after this many of people. So we are supporting this people with health facilities. Then we have communication with communities. We have a specialized sector, communication with communities who are connecting with the people in Burmese language, who are making sure the message that we want to share to them for raising awareness, they are receiving it with their own language. Then we have wash. Wash is to make sure that they have the proper sanitization system in the camp area and surroundings, like the fresh water, then the toilet facilities and everything. We have program like livelihood, like we find out who are affected beneficiary by this crisis, mostly in host community, because Bangladesh government doesn't give permission for these refugees to continue livelihood. But we can train the refugees, but we cannot continue livelihood support. So livelihood, we find out who are the host community people who are affected. We found out what kind of skill they have. We try to give them capacity building support, and then they carry out the activities. Then we have energy and environment support, where like when these people came, they're using the tree to as a fuel for cooking. But we asked them to use the LPG gas, that we provided the LPG gas, so that we have the time to restore the plantation, the forest and everything, and they can use a environment friendly gas for cooking. Since Cox's Bazar is a mountainous area, is a hilly area, is considered as a cyclone zone. Every year there are 3-4 cyclones coming. So we have a disaster risk reduction program where we have each union, each sub-district. There are disaster management committees. We are giving capacity building training. So these people are continuously being trained, and when there's a disaster, they know how to raise awareness, how to guide people to cyclone shelters, how to save lives. We have a very interesting program which is called DTM, Displacement Tracking Matrix. This is a department who are particularly maintaining the they are monitoring the entry point from where the refugees are coming, where they're staying, their family members, how many female, how many children are there. They are regularly monitoring it, doing assessments, carrying out assessment and everything, and giving the numbers, accurate numbers, that how many refugees are actually living in Bangladesh. And then we have emergency response, which is like, you know, that these refugees cannot have a permanent shelter, so we give them semi-shelters, semi-permanent shelters. We support them in giving the equipment to have a shelter where they can live with their family. And we have non-food items, like any kind of support that they needed, like nets, blankets, mosquito nets, toothbrush. We are regularly, monthly basis, we are giving it to them. So thank you for being with me. At the last slide, I want to share with you the responsibility that I am having from my part. I am a senior program support assistant in transition and recovery division. I am particularly, our division is looking after the host community 50% and 50% camps. We are supporting the affected host community people with DRR, disaster risk reduction capacity building support, and I am also supporting livelihood program and environment energy program. So my role is to help our program managers to develop a concept note proposal, which we send to the donor with the proposal and concept note. If the donor is satisfied, if the donor is happy, they give us the money for a certain period of time. We do monitoring, we do reporting, and then we they do the evaluation and they put in their annual report that how much target they had and how much they have achieved. So it goes to the annually the UN assembly, where in general assembly they can declare that this many people were supported, this were achieved and everything. So thank you very much for being with me. It was a honor to present my presentation. I'm handing over to Maria ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ashik, for your excellent presentation and sharing real interesting facts and information about the Rohingya community. Thank you very much. So participants and students, please note, if you have any questions to this particular topic to Ashik, you can write it in the chat box or a comment box. It will be answered at the end of the webinar. So now let me introduce our second speaker, Hamidullah Afghan. Hamidullah Afghan holds a master's degree in public policy from University of Erfurt, Germany, and a BA EPS from St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Bengaluru. During his students' days at St. Joseph's College, Amit was very active student, and he was the first student to become a president of Social Zest Association, the Department of Sociology, under the guidance of Dr. Berin Lukas in the year 2008. Hamid has around 10 years of professional experience with the government and international organizations in different capacities. And he also has served as a mayor of Jalalabad city from 2015 to 2017 as the director of strategic coordination with the Independent Directorate of Local Governance, and as Director of Human Resource with the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. Hamidullah is currently working with the Ministry of Refugees and Repatriation as a Director for Internally Disabled Persons, Government of Afghanistan. Over to Hamidullah Afghan.
Good evening and good morning to some of you, and I want to also thank first of all St. Joseph's College, and especially the Sociology Department, Berin ma'am, Maria ma'am, Anuplal sir, and I want to also thank the participants who are participating in this webinar, and especially the speakers that are there, and Muslim, Ashik, all of you, very warm welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here. Just to correct, currently I'm working as Director of Internally Displaced Persons in Afghanistan in the Ministry of Refugees and Repatriation. I won't be having presentation. I will talk briefly so that we have enough time for the participants to raise questions, and if they require any clarification or answers from our side, I would be happy to do that at the end of the webinar. We all know that we are facing COVID-19 pandemic all over the world, and it has its negative impacts on various aspects of our lives, from economies to education to our social relationship with each other, and from poverty to protection and everything. First of all, let me thank Ashik for making my job easier, who has explained some of the terms that I would be using during my talk to the participants, because IOM is one of our closest partners in the Ministry of Refugees and Repatriation in Afghanistan. You know, Afghanistan is a country that has the largest numbers of refugees after Syria now, around the world, especially in Pakistan and Iran, and also in the rest of the world, European country, USA, and many other countries. We have around 6 million refugees outside of the borders. And apart from that, you all are aware that Afghanistan is a conflict-affected country, and due to conflict and natural disasters, we have a large number of internally displaced persons around various provinces of Afghanistan. In the last few years, we have around 3.9 million people that has been internally displaced, and their situation, some of them are settled in IDP camps where the situation is not very satisfactory, or so to say, so humane. And that's where the humanitarian organization comes in, and as a government we try to coordinate the responses and provide policy guidance and the support to the humanitarian organizations to provide humanitarian assistance to all these vulnerable groups. You know, we are in the era of COVID pandemic, and let me, in Afghanistan especially, categorize it into 3 phases. We had the first phase that was the alert phase, and it was full of anxiety and full of fear, and it was when the news of the COVID-19 outbreak in the media, and you know, there were different messaging and perceptions about this virus, and due to that, when it spread to different countries, and especially to Iran, our neighboring country, where we have a large number of refugees there, Afghan refugees living in Iran. You know, due to government rules and due to fear there and among the refugees, they started to flow into Afghanistan. And it was then that we had the situation out of control. You can imagine that more than 20,000 people crossing the border each day, and you don't have you know, sufficient planning and you know, the precautionary measures to screen every returnee that is coming from Iran. And after Iran, we had a large number of returnees that came from Pakistan, and the situation kind of got out of control. And then the second phase was to contain this in Afghanistan, to contain this situation, and the lockdown was, you know, the quarantine and lockdown was announced all around the world, and especially Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was hard hit. We have extended initially from 3 months to another 3 months. So for 6 months, we had this lockdown now, and it has negatively affected the markets, the economy, education, you know, social relationships, and especially those people that are vulnerable, like IDPs, returnees, children, women, and the disabled people that we have large number of them in Afghanistan. That has a negative impact on that. And what does it mean for the humanitarian responses? That the approach is, as Ashik said, you know, in a normal situation, and the approach is approach to humanitarian assistance in disaster situation is quite different. And we were practically saying, you know, now COVID is a disaster, and a disaster from many aspects, if you describe it. So on that, we are facing a lot of problem. From one side, the resources are limited, and due to bad economic situation and due to loss of job, especially those people who were dependent on you know, daily labor as a source of income and as a source of feeding their family, and that section of the society was badly affected. And we didn't have, our government, and especially the international organization, didn't have much time to prepare for it, because the outbreak of COVID in Afghanistan was so quick. And, you know, the cultural issues play its part, the religious issues play its part, and initially there was miscommunication about this disaster. Food security is another issue that we are facing due to this COVID crisis in Afghanistan. You know that more than 50% of the population of Afghanistan is under poverty line, and the COVID means, you know, that percentage is increasing. You know, the people that were kind of earning some wages, and due to lack of businesses, lockdown of businesses, they lose their businesses, they lose their jobs, and that increases the poverty percentage, and also the food security issues are much more, you know, a challenging task for us as a government and for the international organizations working in Afghanistan. From other side, the capacity, the health capacity of our Ministry of Public Health and the partners that we have in Afghanistan was limited. You can imagine since the outbreak of COVID, In Afghanistan, we had less than 100,000 tests for 37 million population. That is nothing. And that's why the official numbers of COVID positive cases are much lesser than what is the reality. And that means that the medical expenses that the population is going to pay in private hospitals is putting another burden on the families inside Afghanistan and making them poor. You know, sometimes they have to borrow money from their relatives or friends to, you know, attend to their relatives or father or mother or whoever is COVID positive, and they have to treat them at the hospital, and they have to incur a cumbersome amount of money for that. And that in long term will have a negative impact on that. So what does it mean is, and also, you know, due to high mortality these days, you know, it's now out of control, and we hope that the situation with control. And you know, due to high mortality rate, we have all these. Afghanistan is a religious country, and whoever dies, as many other developing countries, you know, a lot of cultural expenses has to go into that, you know, keeping the funeral ceremony and after the funeral. So that also impacts, you know, the economic situation of the different families. So after, we hope that after the situation in the 2 months, we will reach the peak of the COVID, and the government and international organizations are trying to control the situation. So we are now shifting our focus to plan for what will be the situation like after the COVID-19 crisis is controlled in Afghanistan. What will it mean for, you know, the resources, and does the government and international organization will have the necessary capacity to respond to after COVID situation? My personal opinion is that, and we are experiencing that globally, is that every country is hit hard, and there will be a decline in international resources for humanitarian assistance. And we had that first USA who cut some of its assistance to WHO, and that is going to happen in my perception is in the future. So, and countries like Afghanistan, poor country, has to resort to lending money from international institutions. And we had the first experience of that for COVID-19 in Afghanistan. We borrowed our government borrowed money from IMF to cope with COVID-19, and that the countries that depend mostly on international assistance, and when they borrow and there is no sustainable plan for economic development due to emergency situation, that will have its negative impact in the longer term. We, as a Ministry of Refugees and Repatriation, we are responsible for 3 types of population to provide them assistance, coordinate international responses, and mobilize resources to 3 types of population. One is the refugees that are living outside our border, to pave a way for their voluntary return and respectable return to our country. And when they're in our country, to make plans for their integration in the society, because they have lived for a long time outside of their country when they were refugees, to provide job opportunities for them, to provide or coordinate responses, to give them grants to start businesses and stuff like that, and to provide them several documentations that they might be missing to be enrolled in schools, and to get benefits of their citizenry rights in Afghanistan. The second is where the largest population is there in Afghanistan is internally displaced person. And around 90% of the internally displaced people in Afghanistan are due to conflict. And that conflict, we hoped that that conflict will stop due to COVID, but unfortunately, despite COVID crisis that we have the crisis of frequent conflicts around different parts of the country, which make people displaced from their place of origin, and that make them more susceptible to COVID, and also no means we our efforts with the international organization in such a kind of situation to provide assistance, emergency assistance to these IDPs that are displaced during, due to conflict or natural disaster. And once the situation gets normalized in the places of origin, we are coordinating responses and resources to make these families to return to their places of origin and work with them in their places of origin for their maybe their property damage or their if their irrigation system has been damaged, so that need revitalization, or their health clinics and everything that might have been damaged due to conflict. So we coordinate our response with different ministry to provide this support to. And the third part of our job or our ministry's mandate is to provide support to the refugees from other countries who are where the number is very limited. From some countries we have them that are living in Afghanistan, but our efforts is not considerable there because the number is so limited in Afghanistan, and we ourselves have a lot of refugees outside. So currently we coordinating the humanitarian response plan with United Nations agencies in Afghanistan. We had developed one before, but due to COVID, we had to make some adjustments and then present it to the leadership of the government for their comments and review. And that HRP or human response plan will serve as the basics of our humanitarian response mechanism for different vulnerable groups. And let me add here one more issue of protection that was also mentioned by Ashik in his presentation. That's one of the major area, the protection issue for especially children and women. Due to this crisis, we see a large number of, an increase in the number of beggars, especially children and children who are there on the streets, polishing shoes and working as a child laborers, and they're making them susceptible for COVID-19, and they're out of school. Practically, the schools are now closed down, but it will have impact on their, education and health issues. So we are focusing the protection on in the protection cluster. We are focusing on issues of attending to the needs of such population. And in the WASH cluster also, we are a close partner with UNICEF and other UN organizations, where we have IDP camps which is very congested and a very fertile ground for the spread of diseases, different kind of diseases. And we try to coordinate our response with them to provide public awareness, provide basic soap and hand cleaning materials to them, and provide clean drinking water to these populations, so that at least we can contain the rate of the spread of this virus. Let me conclude by saying that COVID-19, the aftermath of the COVID-19 would require a different approach to humanitarian assistance. We would have a large number of vulnerable groups because of this crisis that is hard hit economically, that is hard hit. They might have lost a earning member of their family, and which is happening now. So it will require a different approach, much more coordination between government entities and international organizations, and also providing accurate information to the people about the situation that is coming up and the coping strategies that will be developed. And also a resilience on the part of the population is also needed, because the situation after the COVID will be much more difficult than what we have now. Thank you so much, and I'm open to questions at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamidullah, for sharing your valuable information to our participants this evening. Participants, please feel free to write your questions at the comment box. Those questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. So coming to our third speaker, I'm very much delighted to introduce our third speaker, Mr. Muslim Shah. Muslim Shah is working as a risk and compliance advisor, Catholic Relief Services, Maryland, USA, and providing assistance to 130 million people in more than 90 countries headquartered in Maryland, US. And he is also in charge of policies, their management and implementation for overseas operations. He also supports the development of systems and technologies that provides third-party risk management and oversight for nearly 2,000 partner organizations around the world. Prior to his role at CRS, Muslim worked as an academic chancellor and an educator at Jamani University in his hometown, Herat, Afghanistan. And he has carried out multiple consultancies for the Ministry of Higher Education, Afghanistan. Muslim also led multiple grassroots initiatives engaged in local capacity building, including founding and leading youth development programs. And he also provided a free accelerating training classes to thousands of girls after the collapse of the Taliban regime in late 2001 and early 2002. He graduated with a BA EPS degree from St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Bengaluru in the year 2009. And he also holds a master's degree in international policy and management from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, California. Over to Muslim Shah.
Thank you, Professor Maria, for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone in the virtual wall of St. Joseph's, and good evening. Not sure if everyone on the line with us today are in the same time zone, but those who are in different geographic time zone, I would like to just say good morning and good afternoon. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy wherever you are. While COVID seems to be the greatest evil of our modern times, I'm glad that the consequences of the pandemic has pushed to expand our virtual walls so broad that we all can come together today from different parts of the world as Josephites. Thanks to the leadership of Sociology Department, and my special thanks to Professor Berin ma'am. I also would like to congratulate Ashek and Hamid on their outstanding work in the change that they make to the lives of so many devastated by migration, and now the added health crisis in such protracted conflict contexts. Not just as people who are behind the lines, but as frontline actors. So congratulations on the great work that you're doing. One thing I just wanted to quickly say about what both Ashik and Hamid repeatedly referred to was the term coordination. And as you can imagine, that's the key ingredient of what's being done in making truly a change in the lives of so many. So with that, I would just want to say, coordinate, coordinate, and coordinate well, no matter what you do in life. Being in the era of this pandemic, I think everything is so new to all of us. But it put us in a situation where we go back, right, and check what we are doing wrong. Some of us laugh at it. We didn't change, as we have today, and then end up doing better work as a collective human society. That reminds me actually of a really short read that I just recently had a chance, that was on my list for many, many years, and I was finally able to do it. And I highly recommend for those who have not, and even for those who have, I highly recommend to reread it again. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? It's from a great American writer named Spencer Johnson, and he wrote it, I think, in the late 90s. So I highly recommend this read for those who are curious about ways to deal with change in your life, more so importantly in a time like what we are going through, all of us together right now. So what I would like to do in the rest today, for the time that we have left before we start the Q&A, I just would like to talk about the organization that I work with, the kind of work that the organization does, and the kind of projects that we currently implement in different parts of the world. Let me quickly share my screen. Sorry about that. Okay. Can Professor Mariamam, can you confirm if you see my PowerPoint?
We are not
Sir,
able
we
to see.
cannot see.
Thank you. Here. Trying again.
Yes, done.
You're seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So what I would like to highlight here is look at the work that I do through a lens of too big, too small problem. And here it's a belief that increasingly the nation state is becoming too small for the big problems of life and too big for the small problems of life. It is too small for the big problems because there are no effective international mechanisms to deal with such things as capital flows or loss of jobs that both Hamid and Ashik mentioned in their presentations. It's too big for the small problems because the flow of power to a national political center basically means that the center becomes increasingly unresponsive to the variety and diversity of local needs. To say that in short, there is a mismatch of a scale. And I actually learned this notion and the conception of the too big, too small in my first year as a Josephite in St. Joseph's from Professor Jerome Nilmaraj. I've been thinking about this notion and conception all these years over the past decade. And the more I look into this notion and this conception, the more I come to realization that governments specifically are becoming too big for small problems and too small for the bigger problems. Think of it. Global warming, water problems, education, diseases now in the form of a crisis like COVID-19 are becoming increasingly important. And essentially, there is no pilot in the cockpit. With that being said, I would like to just, can you still see my PowerPoint? Sorry, double checking.
Yes, Shah, we can see.
Good, thanks. So what is Catholic Relief Services, or who is Catholic Relief Services as an organization? For those who may not know the organization, it's an international humanitarian agency of the Catholic community in the United States. It was founded in 1943 by the United States Conference of Catholics of Bishops, basically originally to serve the World War II survivors in Europe. Since then, the agency have expanded in size to reach more than 130 million people in about 100 countries on 5 continents, just as Professor Maria Ma'am mentioned in the outset of the introduction. It's a member of Caritas Internationalis. Caritas Internationalis is essentially a confederation of 165 relief, development, and social services organizations that are currently operating over 200 countries and territories worldwide. As a Catholic agency, it provides assistance to people in need without regard to race, religion, or nationality. We also participate in humanitarian initiatives undertaken by a range of groups, including governments, faith-based communities, and secular institutions. Our organization principally operates on a set of guiding principles. And that's what personally for me is very valuable to be part of a mission like this that makes an impactful change to the lives of poor and needy all over the world. Sacredness and dignity of human person is something that we at CRS value, that every human life is sacred and possesses a dignity that comes directly from our creation and not from any action of our own. We look into rights and responsibilities, that every person has the basic rights and responsibilities that flow from our human dignity, and that belongs to us as human beings, regardless of any social or political structures. The rights are numerous and include those things that make life truly human. We also look into the aspect of social nature of humanity. All of us are social by nature and are called to live in community with others. And today in communities like a virtual wall today, where we want to understand our full potential, and that they cannot be realized in solitude. But in community with others, that's something that we can understand. Like the role models that Ashik and Hamid are presented to us today. How we organize our families, societies, and community directly affects human dignity and our ability to achieve our full human potential. And when I speak of realizing full potential, it reminds me again from another master read that I was introduced for the first time in St. Joseph's College. development as freedom from Amartya Sen. He should be no stranger to any of you. Who argues basically, who talks about that if we want to bring real development, it should be only understood and realized within the context of freedom. And how do you bring that development in order to lead freedom? You help individuals to realize their potential. The mission that St. Joseph's College today delivers to thousands of students, where agents of change are making greatest change in all parts of the world. And looking at the common good, again, in order here for us to have the opportunity to grow and develop fully, a certain social fabric obviously need to exist within society. That's what we see as the common good. Numerous social conditions and political conditions or cultural conditions need to exist. So in order to impact our ability to realize our human dignity, and again, to reach to that full potential that I mentioned. For those of you who are attending or participating this webinar today as students, and if you have not had a chance to read Amartya Sen, Development as Freedom, you are already very late. Please do so. The principle of subsidiarity. I wanted to quickly mention here that this is another valuable principle, at least for me in the organization that I work with. And every day that I go to work, thinking that my work is going to have an impact in the lives of people that even I may not see. But I know that it's there. And because we operate based on a guiding principle that we call and hold very dear to us, subsidiarity. What is subsidiarity to us? It's a higher level of government or organization that should not perform any function or duty in isolation. Again, from what we heard from Ashik and Amit, coordinate, coordinate, coordinate. Because that's when we can make effective change at lower level by people who are closer to the problem and have a better understanding of the issues that we face today. Solidarity, we are part of one human life and one family. Whatever our national, racial, religious, economic, or ideological differences are, and in an increasingly interconnected world, loving our neighbors has global dimensions. We look at option for the poor in every economic, political, and social decision. A weighted concern must be given to the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable. And lastly, stewardship. Stewardship is basically, having that inherent integrity that to all of the creation, that it requires careful protection of the resources, ensuring that we use and distribute them justly and equitably, as well as planning for future generations. And lastly, I would like to talk about the areas of the work within the context of these guiding principles that I mentioned to you, what we do. CRS is both a humanitarian and a development organization. We respond to a variety of emergency response and recovery programs. We take a comprehensive approach to international disaster relief. As experienced first responders, our organization provides life-saving help to get survivors back to their feet. Then we help people to obtain tools and skills that they need to manage their own recovery. A plethora of our projects build on local systems to ensure long-term success. That's the goal. I can mention as an example in one of the projects that I just recently learned about that we are implementing in India as a response to COVID crisis. In the states of Kerala, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and I think Delhi. As you all know, the lockdown that we are all going through as a collective has resulted in sudden loss of jobs and homes for migrant and daily wage workers. I think research shows, if I remember correctly, 42 million migrant workers have been affected in India, left with no space to stay and with no money, with money running out fast. I heard workers were stranded in cities and were focused to walk hundreds of kilometers back to their villages because public transport was shut down. This resulted in massive exodus as the limited shelter homes could not accommodate such large scale numbers of people. The administration tried to stop this by blocking roads, sealing the state and district boundaries, as many of you know, and this has led to even further chaos as people are now stuck at the destinations, in transit, at the source level, at the source as well. Various governments have set up, I think about 20,000 is the last statistics I hear, relief camps, and nearly 3 million people have been provided food. But the numbers are potentially much higher, and we may not have access, who may not have access to food and shelter. Estimates I also recall that indicated 3 out of 10 returning migrants could be carrying the virus back to their villages, which will dramatically increase the disease spread, placing millions of rural population who have limited access to public health services. Our organization targets these high-risk group through this project that we have just started last month, targeting high-risk migrant workers who are stranded in the work or cities or in their villages, and due to travel, they're stranded because they can't go back to their villages. Our organization currently target the states that I mentioned in order to fill the gaps by providing life-saving supplies to meet their critical needs, like including water, food, hygiene, and related to gender, and also child-sensitive transit shelter needs, and information for those populations and how to stay safe. Through such programming, we also focus on correct messaging to address fear. Hamid, in the outset of the presentation, mentioned to all of us that some people try to hide the death of some of their relatives because it's a taboo. I think it's important that we pass across the right messaging to address that fear. How do we promote that social inclusion and prevent the stigmatization of the migrant workers in this context in the states that where we currently respond to in Kerala, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, and New Delhi? We also work in the, extensively in the area of agriculture. That's one of the areas of the work that I firsthand saw myself in Afghanistan when I first started working for the organization in Afghanistan, and then provided support in the region. Although I wasn't involved because I was doing IT work at the time. That was another part of my career. What amazed me, the impact of the agricultural work that had on the livelihoods of millions of people in Afghanistan. We currently implement about 108 agricultural projects, and they span over 51 countries. And the goal here is basically the pathway to prosperity for these farmers in need. We have extensive programming in the health sector. We are considered one of the leader organizations in the humanitarian space, where we carry out a wide array of health-related activities tailored to the needs of the countries and the communities that we serve. Some of the key intervention areas for our health programs are focused on malaria, nutrition, HIV and tuberculosis. I think integrated early childhood development, a really key piece there again. And then health systems is strengthening, such as providing support and helping build the capacity of these local organizations. Again, Hamid and Ashik mentioned about the capacity issues of some of these local organizations and how critical that is in delivering such kind of responses, particularly in the sector of health and WASH that they both refer to. Another key area that I personally, again, really value closely and dear to me is the education. Education is basically the heart of what we do at CRS and part of its mission. We support communities, local partners, and governments in their efforts to ensure that all children, including the most vulnerable and marginalized, have the right and access to a quality education. Referring back to Amartya Sen is where our philosophy is based on. Development as freedom. How do we achieve development? We free people by helping them realize their potential. That is through development. Again, another example I saw in Afghanistan where I worked also when I finished my education from the United States, I went back to Afghanistan and I lectured undergrad students with the belief that education is the only way out for a sustainable solution for a fragile state of where Afghanistan is right now. And for with the same belief, I really closed this intervention of our program really dear to me. I recall from a recent multi-year research that was done by New York University in our education programming in Afghanistan. We are very big in terms of education in Afghanistan and similar in other protracted conflict contexts, starting big in Yemen, working in Syria, Iraq, and so many of these countries where access to education is heavily tampered. So we work closely with the government institutions where there is legitimacy there, or local partners. That's why one of our guiding principles is subsidiarity, working with the local organizations and partner with them. For the example I was referring to Afghanistan was the research that was conducted. It was a multi-year research on the education system in Afghanistan and the work that CRS did in Afghanistan. Well, just to provide a bit of a quick background there, CRS provides community-based education programs. We have many remote places in Afghanistan that the government as a public service provider do not have access to. CRS fills that gap because the government becomes too small for the big problems. And how do we fill that gap? By training local community members, those who have the right education, those who can be trained to become teachers, and help fill the gap that the government cannot currently respond to because of all other priorities. So we essentially built local schools through this local-based community education program in remote parts of Afghanistan. And this research that was recently conducted showed that the public trust of the communities towards international organizations, and coincidentally, even it was not the intention of our programs, increased the trust and perception towards trust for public institution, for the public service provider, in this case, the government. One program targeting community-based education program has a cascading effect in a country like Afghanistan, where fragility is on the top of the list when it comes to nation building and state building. Those are the kind of impact that CRS makes as a result of not even those are not intended results, but as a result of the externalities, the positive externalities that our interventions create in such environments. I know we are limited with time, so I would briefly also would like to mention microfinance is another area where we work on formal institutions, where we serve basically or reach to the world's poorest people, where access is not available. CRS says some of our microfinance programs in developing countries work through microfinance associations and their institutions, as well as with the informal or community-based savings. So what we do is basically we work in these countries, and the focus is to increase savings led microfinance by helping community members to form their own groups, pool their savings, and make loans to each other in the community. This approach has created economic opportunities for about 5 million people who live in world's most impoverished areas. Water security is another key aspect of where we intervene. If I recall correctly, one of the latest publications from the United Nations estimated that about 3.6 billion people currently live in vulnerable to water security areas or vulnerable to water security. And what is even more intimidating is that that number could reach to about 6 billion people in 2050. That's sad. Climate change, over extraction of water from aquifers, and contamination of surface and groundwater all threaten the ecosystem that we live in. And the availability of fresh water itself is in its entirety. In nearly every part of the world, water is being polluted at a scale that threatens human health and economic development, not just for ourselves, but also for the future generations. So we really try to mainstream water security with gender programming, because we know that, for example, in many of these communities we work, because of the imbalance in the purchasing power, girls may not be an advantage and they may be the ones who be mostly abused. So how do we mainstream gender equality or gender mainstreaming with water security? So that is where we bring this integrated approach towards development as freedom. Justice and peace building, another key area that we work. This is again another large area of the sector we are involved in, and we have a justice peace lens, basically a philosophical lens that we look into how we engage with civil society and the public and the private sectors, for that matter. To what do we foster? We foster inclusion, equity, and accountability. They focus both on peace building in post-conflict recoveries and those that may be ongoing. I think from one of the examples that I remember is CRS did a remarkable work in the Philippines, in the southern Philippines, in the island of Mindanao. I think it's the largest island in the southern part of the Philippines, where there is this group. I think it's called the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. They are separatists. They want their own state, and these communities weren't safe because of so many issues like abducting and kidnapping, all sorts of those evil activities. And we were able to work with local institutions to create a culture of peace through the education system, through the curriculum of the education system, working with these local organizations and partners to advocate for a culture of peace, where we made significant headways in creating peace and peace zones in those areas. Similarly, we have many of such programs involved in lots of other parts of the world. Youth, we have a holistic vision towards youth. We see positive youth. We see this as the most positive development that we can be engaged in with communities and local partners. Most of our youth programming is in the area of economic strengthening mainly. And again, it ties back to other sectors. Again, when I mentioned integrated development, like if we want to strengthen the economic position or purchasing power of individuals in those impoverished societies, how do youth can be strengthened through having that independence? We include agricultural livelihoods, we look into education, we look into the health aspect, and of course we look into the peace building, all of these sectors holistically as a whole. Lastly but not least is the peace, the partnership capacity is strengthening. Professor Mariamam in the introduction mentioned that CRS currently works with about 2,000 partners, because we believe that subsidiarity is the key to development, is freedom. Those who are closest to the problems are the ones who are most knowledgeable about these problems and know the solutions better. So we partner with them. They are the key allies in delivering on our mission to make a change in the lives of the poor and the needy. I am not a frontline manager. As Professor Mariamam mentioned, I manage policies, I formulate policies, I write policies, I create technological systems to ensure that those policies are informed. We are the recipient, one of the largest recipients of the funding from the US government. It runs about $1 billion a year. So we manage, me and our team, me as an advisor there, manage that entire portfolio to ensure that we deliver in the way that we are steward of our resources in order to create efficiencies in the mission that we have. With that, I'll take a pause, and I think I'll hand it over to you, Professor Mariamam. Thank you.
Thank you, Shah. So for sharing your ideas and views on this particular topic to our participants. Now over to Hanif sir for concluding note.
Good evening, dear academicians and dear students. I am Anuplal, Faculty Industrial Relations and Dean Social Sciences, St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru. You have listened to 3 outstanding presentations by Mr. Hamidullah Afghan and Mr. Muslim Shah, both citizens of Afghanistan, and Mr. Ashik Kabir from Bangladesh. All 3 studied in our esteemed institution. St. Joseph's College has had long, fruitful ties with Afghanistan and Bangladesh. We had students from Afghanistan as early as 1930s. Very interestingly, in the year 1937, when the students of St. Joseph's College formed a secret association to fight the British colonial rule, one of the members was from an Afghan royal family who was in Bangalore, again as a refugee, unfortunately. We have had many students from Bangladesh also, and interestingly, in the 1971 war with Pakistan, a number of distinguished alumni from our college, donning military uniform, had fought for the liberation of Bangladesh. And one of our senior-most professors, Professor B.J. Matthews from the Department of History, was on emergency war duty during the 1971 war. That was a little bit of history to show our vast ties with Afghanistan and Bangladesh. Mr. Ashik Kabir, distinguished old student of our college, presently in Bangladesh, has given an excellent view into the struggles and tragedy of Rohingya refugees. He has spoken about the humanitarian response in Bangladesh to this horrible crisis. He brought out one particular point which many a times the press fails to bring in. The problem of deforestation as part of this massive refugee crisis. He has also stated the difficulties that this area of Cox's Bazar, where the refugees are now camping, always face a cyclone-prone area, a very poor country, and on top of that refugee crisis, and still how his agency is doing a wonderful job. Mr. Hamidullah Afghan, another colorful personality from St. Joseph's College. He is the first foreigner in the history, in the 137-year-old history of St. Joseph's College, to become the first president of any association in the college. He was the first president of the Sociology Students Association Social Cess. Mr. Hamidullah Afghan has stated the problems in Afghanistan, the problem being a conflict zone. On top of that, now the country faces COVID-19, as in the case of India and other nations, the humanitarian assistance which is given, but at the same time, how cultural issues are adding on to the COVID-19 worries. He has also clearly mentioned how there are many people who are displaced, who want to return to their homeland. A lot of problems, and at the same time, a number of work done by various agencies. Thank you, Hamidullah, for giving us so many ideas. Thank you, Kabir, for bringing out certain things which even the press doesn't bring out. Mr. Muslim Shah, a distinguished law student of our college from Afghanistan, who is presently working in United States of America with a wonderful agency, the Catholic Relief Services, one of the foremost agencies which takes care of people in distress, to whichever faith, to whichever country, to whichever nationality they belong. Mr. Muslim Shah, in his lengthy talk, has highlighted various things. How this agency looks into various issues, be it education, water crisis, diseases. He has mentioned how there is a preferential treatment and option for poor, how the agency looks into microfinance, how they partner with the local agencies to bring in peace, which is so very necessary in the trouble-torn world. Thank you, Mr. Muslim Shah. Before I sign off, I would like to state that this international webinar hosted by the Department of Sociology, St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru, has created few records. All the three distinguished speakers are foreigners and are alumni of St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru. It's a strange coincidence that all the three resource persons, the three teachers assisting, Mrs. Maria David, myself Anup, and my colleague from St. Joseph's Evening College, Mr. Dept, the technical team led by Neeraj Savio, all of us have done our BA in Economics, Political Science, Sociology, and all of us are students of the senior most teacher of our college, who is the brain, who is the energy behind this international webinar, Dr. Berin Lukas. With this note, I hand over to Madam Maria and team led by Neeraj Savio. The floor is open for question answer session. Open house commence now.
Good evening. So I shall be handling the question round. So we shall be rotating the questions. The first question is to Mr. Kabir Ashik. What do you think can be done better regarding migration, especially considering there's a pandemic out there right now? This is the first question.
Thank you, Savio. Regarding this thing when the COVID-19 started, especially Bangladesh government found the cases on 8th of March, and then when the case started increasing on 26th March, the whole country was taken under lockdown. So in the part of migration, what we did as we made sure that WHO, one of the working agencies who are looking after the health issues of UN agencies and the humanitarian agencies, they made sure they gave us the guideline how to work. Like the Bangladesh government was also concerned because the refugee camp is a bit far away from the operation city of Coxbazar, which is 40 kilometers from Coxbazar. They made sure all the movements and everything was restricted only to certain operations, like food operations, to give them food and LPG support and the necessary items. It was continuously done weekly basis and maintaining the guideline of the WHO, maintaining hygiene, and also maintaining the social distance. Like the guideline was shared with us, and all the humanitarian agencies, they conducted training like how to do the operation while facing this COVID-19 challenges. So we made sure during this migration crisis, it was difficult for like maintaining the social distances, particularly in the case of in the camp area, when there is frequently movement between host community, local community, and refugees. But we, the Bangladesh government and the agencies, were very much cautious about making sure the affected people, anyone like who has symptoms and everything, they were kept under quarantine rather than moving towards the camp area or any surrounding areas where contamination can take place. So it has been like the number in the camps is not that much high because of this restriction, but yes, there are cases, and the measures that has been suggested to us, it was successful in a way, not fully successful, but that is how we're following the migration movement in the city of Cox's Bazar right now.
Thank you. Next question to Mr. Hamidullah Afghan shall be handled by Neha Joseph from the technical team.
Thank you, Neeraj. This is towards Mr. Hamidullah Afghan. The first one says, what can be done to better the COVID situation in Afghanistan, keeping in mind the religious sensitivities of the region? How can they better follow the guidelines laid down by the WHO?
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, it's the religious issue has made the COVID situation a little bit complex in Afghanistan. And at the beginning, let me bluntly state that it was believed that it's just a conspiracy theory and stuff like that, and everybody was talking. Nobody believed that COVID exists until it reached everybody's home, and now they hardly believe, and now they believe it because every family, so to say, the people I know, at least the friends I have, at least 1 or 2 or 3 members of their family have been affected by COVID, and we see a lot of mortalities, a lot of people that are diseased due to that pass away due to COVID, and now there is everywhere they believe that the COVID is so. The situation has changed a bit, but at the beginning, the messaging was not effective, and the methods that were used by the government, from one side you announce a lockdown, and then from the other side you do public awareness by putting up billboards in the city, so nobody is there to see it. So these methods, and awareness campaigns have to be rethought of, and plus there are still, this Now the situation has changed 180 degrees. Now people, at least, they believe that COVID is there, but there is a mistrust or on the public health institutes or institutions or hospitals that they're unable to cure or provide the necessary support to patients that are affected by COVID. So now people try to stay at home, even if they're in very worse situation from COVID, they try to stay home and try to cure themselves by getting advices from their friends who have the similar experiences. We see now increasing number of people that put up their masks. We see increased number of people that use sanitizers. We see that increased number of people at least use sanitization methods. And plus, positive thing is that now the distance between the religious clergies and mullahs and the government has decreased. And now even in mosques, they, during prayers, they say that you have to maintain social distancing. I would say it should have been, for practical reason, there should have been some limitation, but it's it's not possible in Afghanistan because of the religious sensitivities. Mosques remain open and the people go there, but at least the mullahs and the imams say that please maintain social distance. So it has been changing, but it's too late, I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Hamidul Afghan. The next question is to Mr. Muslim Shah. The question reads as follows. Different countries across the globe are witnessing a draconian lockdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know that lockdown cannot be the long-term solution as economies and societies are in tatters. So according to you, what should be the way ahead to tackle the pandemic, keeping in view the difference in terms of developed, developing, and underdeveloped countries across the globe?
Who is it? May I know who is that asked the question?
Actually, we don't. We just call the question.
Okay, just want to name the person, but to say, great question. I think it's $1 million question, right? That's what everybody is trying to figure out. How do we cope with this situation? Is the lockdown, are we resetting the clock with the lockdown? I think generally it depends on the capacity of different countries, but I don't think there is one prolonged approach in resolving this situation or addressing it. I think different countries currently are becoming creative in the way they want to address the situation. I know because the challenges are different, as pointed out in the question, like maybe in a country like what Hamid was referring to there, how do we work on the trust building between the public and the public institution as the public service provider? How do we do the right messaging in order to inform? I mean, changing this perception that COVID is not a hoax. It is also not surprising that it would happen in a country like Afghanistan. I have come across people, not physically, but I know people who have raised here in the States considering COVID as hoax. I think the key is how the government as an institution delivers on doing the right messaging in order to sensitize the communities and people such that we need to take this issue seriously. And yes, the draconian lockdown I think, cannot go for a long time. I think we need to get creative. Every one of us as individuals and together as societies, we need to get creative. So I live in the state of Maryland, and I'm about 26 kilometers north of the main city or downtown of Baltimore. And yesterday I realized that the government issued an order opening all non-essential businesses. And what does it entail? Non-essential businesses, meaning restaurants are open. So they cannot accommodate people to be in the building, and they got creative by working with the community to turn the parking lots that is just across from the street from the restaurants to have an open space outside, coming with the term parklets. Parklets, I see now, are becoming more common areas for restaurants to not just continue generating the business, but also allow people to safely come together and socialize in the distance that is guided by either CDC in this case or the WHO for the international context. I don't personally see the prolonged lockdown to continue because we are also vulnerable. But I think while we are trying to respect that, we need to get creative. It's the concept of how do you build a plane while you're flying it is the kind of question that we are dealing with. And I think that's mainly what I do in my area of work as we are dealing, or as we are building a plane, how do we fly it? So I think the creativity here depends on different country programs. Yes, the lockdown is not going to be the solution for a long term. But I think as we move to the next phase, how do we make sure we do it in a smart way so that we avoid any type of spikes that some of the countries I heard, like in Singapore, they had a significant spike. How do we want to avoid that? So I think it really depends on the smartness to ourselves as individuals, how much we want to respect. I know it's hard not to see friends, families, but if we do it, how do we do it in a smart way? I think there are things that we can do as individuals and things that the governments can do. And I personally see that that requires consistent and constant awareness raising around this to get the science out to places where currently there is misconception about it. But as Hamid said, people see it in practice, people see it in theory, people see it that these are real. And I think the governments need to step up. And I think that's where my point of presentation in the beginning is that nation states are becoming too big for small problems and too small for big problems. So it's not just the responsibility of the governments. I don't think we should always expect our governments to respond to this. What we can do as individuals to be part of the solution. And that way of thinking is, I think, the solution moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Muslim Shah. Before we get on to the next round of questioning, I would like to add for all the participants to kindly remain on the meeting, as an important instruction regarding the certificates shall be issued only at the end of the question round. My next question is to Mr. Kabir Ashik. So the question reads as follows. Is there a considerable difference in the impact of COVID-19 on the citizens and that on the refugees?
Thank you very much, Savio. Yes, there is a huge difference, like before the COVID-19 situation and after the situation. First, I would like to start with our operation thing, which is, when a project is running, it is a timeline is there. There is a timeline given for 1 year or 2 years, and there is an implementation plan. Like from 3 months, we'll give training. 3 months, the income generation will happen. 3 months, the selling and everything will happen. This kind of planning is there. So when COVID-19 started, all this planning and everything was hampered. So we have to come. All the donors asked us to do reprogramming or reallocation. The budget, the timing we had, they asked us with the restriction in the operation, with the limited time and everything for COVID operation, what can we do? So we have to change the activities that were planned. And for COVID-19, particularly in my case, in my department, what we did was that we got the feedback from our local doctors, our local civil surgeon, or the Director General of Health Services in Bangladesh. Also, the famous Devi Shetty is very famous in Bangladesh. In one of the videos, it was promoted that the mask which is needed for protect yourself for the transmission, it was not possible due to the COVID-19 to import from China to Bangladesh. It was very difficult at that time because all the facilities in the airport was closed due to lockdown. So what happened in mid-March when the lockdown was supposed to be imposed and Bangladesh was facing more and more cases, we were suggested by our local doctors to go for the production of reusable cloth mask. So we produce this reusable cloth mask in huge number. Right now we have produced more than 1 million cloth mask, which is with the specification to control the transmission person to. It is not a N95 mask, but it is for the person to control the person-to-person transmission. We are producing with the local beneficiary who were planned to do the agriculture activity, who were planned to do the technical activities. We are using those beneficiaries who are poor, who are suffering, who are hampered due to COVID-19, and we are making them produce this cloth mask, which is continuing their livelihood production during this COVID-19. Not only that, we started after taking permission for all relevant government departments, we started producing hand sanitizer, we started producing face shield locally. So we are using these local beneficiaries to self-reliant on them. They are making all this thing, and during this restriction, they are supporting themselves with innovation of idea. And in all over Bangladesh, the number is increasing right now. Every day, it is 4,000 cases identified. But Bangladesh government itself, earlier there was no testing kits. Bangladesh government started developing the testing kits right now. So there is huge changes. Like again, I'm suggesting that I have written an article on COVID-19, the pre and post world after the COVID-19. There are huge changes in our life, daily life, and aftermath of COVID-19 will be very challenging for us. As I want to thank Muslim because he continuously telling in his presentation that coordinate, and yes, it is the main thing in a humanitarian support to coordinate. It depends that how much faster and how much effectively you are going to support the person or the beneficiary who needs your help. If like I also like the Berin Ma'am's and the organization team's idea to put me, Muslim, and Hamidullah in line, because I am working in a UN agency, Hamidullah in a government agency, and Muslim is working in a donor agency. So in reality, we are like the donor agencies, the government and the implementing agencies are working, coordinating together to reach the people as fast as possible. Even though of work, people are in quarantine, people are in lockdown, but the humanitarian worker, there was no rest. Continuously from the beginning till now, we're working, be it at home, be it at field, at the front line. Continuously, we're trying to support the local people, the refugees, and try to support it, try to make sure that as soon as possible, we support them with required support so that many lives could be saved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashik sir. My next question is to Hamidullah Afghan. Sir, your question goes as follows. After US resignation from WHO, what is the significance of developing countries in continuing their membership of WHO and UN allied institutions?
Thank you. I think Raja Ranjit has asked this question. I read it in the chat box. First of all, the decision of US to withdraw or to resign from WHO, my personal opinion is it's a very premature decision. And as Muslim said in his presentation, we have as the world, and we need coordination and cooperation. And we need a pilot in the cockpit, and international organizations such as UN organization, WHO, UNDP, UN, all UN agencies, at least some order or a platform of discussion has been provided on a global scale, and where the nation states come together, discuss their problems, and try to find common solution to that. And from other part, as Ashik said, from one side we try to develop sustainable development goals or SDGs on a global scale, and we commit ourselves to that, and health being a major part of that. I guess it's very premature, and it doesn't mean that the U.S. has withdrawal or resignation the other nation state has to follow. There is still value in keeping the international organization intact. That provides a platform for coordination, cooperation, pooling the resources together, trying to develop standard approaches. And that's what we need. We don't need a chaos. We don't need an anarchy. And yeah, it's true that decision-making processes inside these IGOs and also the membership issues has to be rediscussed and remodeled, but we do need the existence of such organizations to support global causes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamidul Afghan. So this is the last question to Mr. Muslim Shah. So the question reads as follows. How the Catholic Relief Services work during the COVID-19 pandemic situation to better the lives of poor and needy people?
Great question. We have a variety of programming. We have established, just in the light of the pandemic as it was announced or declared by WHO as a pandemic, we immediately, at the agency level, started developing a response framework, basically coming up with a theoretical as well as a pragmatic approach in responding to the theoretical pieces based on the information and the modeling that was done by CDC. CDC is the Center for Disease Control here in the US. It's a large health institution that provides a lot of research and science and programming in that area, and they closely work with WHO as well. So based on the intensity of the issue that was predicted of how intensive it could get, at the agency level, we came up with a response framework. The response framework first looked at where we had data, because we can only make decisions in such kind of interventions when we have data. Without data, we cannot make any executive decisions as it relates to our intervention. So looking at data to find out where those vulnerable places will be, we started acting accordingly. And while we were doing it in the US, we didn't know that US is going to be the epicenter. Most of the existing programming are around distribution of PPEs, is what's known as personal protective equipments. So we do a lot of distribution of PPEs for government partners, where governments do not have the ability or the capacity to supply the needed equipments. We work with those governments directly, or directly work with hospital institutions through the government in supplying them with the necessary equipments in places where we are affected intensively. CRS also has large operations in the United States itself. We work with a lot of church-based institutions to reach out to vulnerable populations in the US as well, because here a large part of the population are impacted by the virus as well. In most places where we have intensive programming, currently in 31 countries in Africa, luckily the spread is not as intensive, so it hasn't affected much of the way we operate directly, but in places it has impacted us, we have kind of have a shift of the way we respond, meaning only look into the health aspect in this and prioritize health. And this is not new to CRS. We have been a pioneer when Ebola broke out in Africa. We had a very pioneering response to Ebola, and we are trying to apply some of the historical lessons learned. I know we are 1 minute over time, so I want to just be conscious of time. I'll just take a pause there.
Thank you, Mr. Mozam Shah. We now come to the end of the question round. Before I hand over to Berin ma'am for concluding remarks, I would like to inform the participants that a feedback link shall be sent to you after the conclusion of this webinar. You need to fill the feedback form in 2 hours to become eligible to receive an e-certificate. I repeat, if you miss the deadline, you are simply not eligible to receive an e-certificate. Thank you. Over to Berin ma'am.
Thank you, dear participants, for taking part in this webinar. Now, what am I to say? It is such a proud and happy moment that we have Ashik and Muslim and Hamid here with us. I mean, I don't think we have conducted about 6 webinars, and this is the culmination in the sense that you have come together, and there was no hesitation when I requested you people. 3 of you had absolutely no hesitation to come and help the Department of Sociology, St. Joseph's College. So a big thank you to Ashik, to Hamid, and to Muslim. May God bless you abundantly and all the very best. Thank you very much.